Hi, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 5 of My Words, Our Journey. Thank you for continuing to join me each week. Today we begin with Chapter 23. The note would mean nothing to anyone outside their group. Madison and the rest of the women, they knew exactly what Sharon was asking. Before they had cut off communication, Megan had suggested they use the local dating site as a way to keep in touch, so no one would feel completely alone. Madison, at the time, knew they were worried about her being isolated from the pack. They needed their shooter to be rested and in complete control for this to work. So today, as she read the note under the title Starting a New Life, in the Women Seeking section of the site, she was not entirely surprised by the request. It had been agreed if one of them was in trouble or changed their mind about participating in the scheme, then they could use the site to communicate what was going on. They had also agreed that if one asked to be moved up for whatever reason, if Madison could make it happen, she would. After checking her notes from their last meeting, she knew Sharon was asking her to be outside the bowling alley, downtown tonight at midnight. It was her third location on her list of 7, and she had written next to it that Sharon's husband was always the last one to leave when the night crew came in to clean the place. Things must be going bad for her if she wants to move up to number 2, Madison figured. Now she would have to pump herself up. Until the message, she had thought it would be another few days before her next shooting. How things changed in the world of murder and deception, she thought. As Madison prepared herself mentally for the task at hand, Sharon was preparing too. Tonight she would go with Kevin on his bowling night. There had only been 2 other times she had had such an honor. One was when he had lost his wallet and didn't want to drive alone, and the second was when he had broke his left foot. She had run through several ideas, and not one had come out a winner, so in the end, Sharon decided to see what his mood was when he got home. If nothing else, she would just show up at closing time. Wouldn't he love that, she thought. Even if he was mad, how long would it last? Only the amount of time it took for Madison to take the fatal shot. Sharon can handle that. Guilt had snaked its way into her head more than once, to the point she had thought of ways to keep Kevin from leaving the house this evening. With each thought that led her in that direction, however, she had 20 that reminded her of how her life had been. Sleepless nights, humiliation, regret, and disappointment. But was it worth committing a sin? She wondered. In the end, that was the question she needed to answer, and she had. Tonight, Madison would help her start over, and this time she would not make the same mistakes. She would not settle, and she would not be foolish. She would not let someone control her life. Dinner was ready to come out of the oven. His bowling shirt was pressed and lying at the foot of the bed, and his shoes and ball bag were by the door, and just in time because her man was pulling into the driveway. Chapter 24. It was late, much past her bedtime. She had watched car after car leave the parking lot over the past hour and 20 minutes. Through the speaker, the voice of a raging late-night left-winger kept her from dozing off. Between the Democratic loudmouth, coffee, and cigarettes, she thought she could make it. The comfort, warmth, and safety of her bed was on her mind, however. With her mind drifting this way and that, Madison had to force herself to push through thoughts out of her head. She was convinced if she let her mind wander freely, she would surely drive herself crazy. Madison had not lost all sense of ethics. Right from wrong was not totally eluding her. She knew deep down what the women were doing was criminal, and there was no false illusion, at least for her, that they were serving some higher purpose. Madison knew they were doing this for them. What could they be doing? She wondered. There was only one car in the lot. Had they ridden together? Or had something happened and Sharon wasn't coming at all? Could she still carry on if that was the case? A part of her resented the fact the others were home, not having to make this crucial decision. Still another part knew she owed them for her freedom. Ryan had not been found. The best she could figure, the small-town fire department had no reason to dig to the bottom of the hole where he would have been covered by the debris from the fire. Taking a chance and driving out there alone one evening, she had discovered they had bulldozed the whole mess, and it looked like someone was making some sort of a dirt track or something for four-wheelers, she figured. Through eyes about to give in to the night, she caught the movement of the 2 glass doors. It was impossible to pick up the details, but There were clearly two figures coming out into the parking lot. Decision made. While Madison slid from her car, Sharon was afraid her heart was going to burst. Lucky for her and Madison, Kevin had stopped paying attention to her years ago, because otherwise anyone else would have noticed something was terribly wrong. It was not how she envisioned herself handling the pressure. "I'm glad you came tonight," she heard him say from out of nowhere. In fact, it was the first words he had spoken to her in the past few hours. They had had a nice dinner, and when he was getting ready to leave, she had mentioned in passing she'd like to join him for bowling. It had been a while. And to her surprise, he had agreed, grabbed 2 beers from the fridge, telling her she could drive. Not knowing what to say, she just continued walking. Just those 5 words had been so out of character for him. She was taken back. "I know what I did the other night was, well, it was way out of line. You don't deserve that, especially from me." They had stopped, and she thought she could hear real feelings in his voice. The lights that actually worked in the parking lot were dim, and she could not see his face even with the closeness they shared. He must have known she would be shocked, but the beer he had consumed over the past several hours caused him to carry on. "You may not be able to believe me, and I understand if you don't, but, well, seeing you here tonight and listening to the guys talked about how nice you looked and, well, how lucky I am. Well, I miss the way we used to be, I don't know. I just thought, do you think we have a chance of starting over?" "You must be kidding me," she thought. The pace of her heart had slowed. Now instead, it was breaking into small pieces that were getting caught in her throat. For years, she would have given her left hand to hear the words that hovered in midair. As if she had finished off a bottle of whiskey, suddenly Sharon felt dizzy, about to fall from the actions and sincerity of her husband. Sensing her need for support, Kevin moved in and wrapped his arms around her. Tears fell, emotions ran, and Madison was still coming, and from her vantage point, she had no way of knowing what was transpiring. Sharon, lost in the moment, did not see Madison. She did sense her, however, and made a move to protect Kevin. Not out of anything other than pure instinct, she shouted and shoved him out of the way. From the angle, she could see the look of despair on his eyes and in his face. He had thought she was rejecting him. He had no idea his life was in danger. Before there was time for any kind of reaction, she heard the bang of the revolver, turned to watch the once mighty man crumble to the ground. She was meant to feel the weight lifted, free and relieved. It was not the case. As she struggled to find her cell phone, she ran to Kevin's side. In the distance, she could already hear the car working hard to get away as fast as possible. The two women had never spoke, never had made eye contact. It was how it was supposed to be. When the hand grabbed her hard around her forearm, she was startled. She had just assumed he was dead. Pulling her close, he had to work hard to spit out the words. "Something clicked around after I saw how I hurt you the other night. It was my last stunt, and it was my worst. I was going to try and make it up to you." She did not resist as he led her hand to the left front pocket of his jeans. Sharon did not understand until she felt the small box. "No, no," she shouted from somewhere at the center of her being. "This is not how it's supposed to be. No." Falling to the ground, wailing and shaking, then realizing during her episode she had moved several feet away from her wounded husband. When she returned and knelt by his side, she saw the box had been taken from his pocket and placed on his chest, only inches from where the bullet had made its entrance. His eyes pleaded for her to open the box and reveal its contents. Reluctantly and with great trepidation, she took the box and held it in the palm of her trembling hand. When the lid was raised, the cross pendant sparkled upon its foam resting place. Sirens could be heard approaching quickly, but there was no rush now. The life had left his eyes moments after she pinned the cross to her blouse and thanked him with a soft but truly heartfelt kiss. It was not something she would have chosen for herself, but the fact that he had said the words and had taken the time to purchase a gift, it was more than she could take, and she broke down again. When the police and ambulance arrived, she was supposed to be acting. There was no need. She was a wreck and had no trouble showing it. In the end, though, she did manage to describe the assailant: truck, and circumstances just like she had rehearsed. Sally Fields would have been proud. The ambulance was in no hurry as it left the now well-lit parking lot. As she watched the lights fade in the distance, she wondered and waited to see who was going to question her. Now her new life could begin, she thought. And now, somehow, the one that had just ended did not seem so bad. The drugs the medic had given her over an hour ago had not taken effect. Between the shivering, sweating, and incessant crying, her body was not taking it well at all. There was only one thing she had decided in between her states of uncontrollable hysteria. The girls, especially Madison, did not need to know about this. Easily the worst night of her life. Ever. Chapter 25. There was something gnawing at him. It was a feeling he was familiar with. Usually, it was a sign he had learned recently not to ignore. His gut had steered him in the right direction in the child predator case, and now the same hairs were standing up on the back of his neck, along with the same feeling deep within his stomach. Something was not right in small-town USA. Why Shawn became attached, sometimes even obsessed with certain cases, was a mystery even to him. Most, he would read and move on. Others would grab him like a grandfather who took hold of his grandson who had just stepped out of line. A grip that was intent to startle, focus, and gain the attention of the one being held. Experience had taught Shawn to follow his instinct. Within the past month or so, he had noticed one small town in the Midwest had had some bad things happen within the confines of this usually quiet community. The first time he had noticed mention of their beloved town was when he had read an article about the author of several popular children's books, Marcus Sullivan, who had died and been put to rest in his small hometown. It made him smile when he thought about one of his favorites by Mr. Sullivan. The crazy, wacky, wildly funny, but never scary tales of Stancil and Lakin. It had been one of the first books Shawn remembered reading, with several chapters, lots of words, and few pictures. He had felt so grown up. He had to go back and look after the first tragic story following the death of the author, the beating of a woman and disappearance of her husband only a few weeks later. After that, he didn't have to check back when he read the first murder and then the second murder outside the bowling alley. The mention of a serial killer and the lack of evidence in each case had caused Shawn to put all of the stories on the back burner. He was held by the grip. After pulling all the stories, copying, pasting, and setting up the emails, he hit the key button, the send button. Within seconds, his two friends from other parts of the crime-fighting world would see what had caught his eye, and hopefully respond with their thoughts. He hated to wait too long for their feedback, especially when he was waiting for someone to validate what he already believed to be true. Kenny had been checking out local restaurants on the internet when he saw the new message pop up on the bottom of his screen. Rachel had agreed to have dinner with him, and he was doing his research on the finest local fare. If the men's magazine had been right, on the first date, everything affected the lady's first impression, from the shoes to the watch, from the flowers to the goodnight kiss, to the restaurant and the way you treat the waiter. A first date was no place for the faint of heart, he thought. After narrowing it down to 3 restaurants that could not be more different, Kenny opened up the rather large file from his FBI friend. He had to admit, it was interesting reading, though he wouldn't wait until the following morning to respond to the email. He wondered what Leonard would think of Shawn's latest possible project. Leonard would not see the email until 2 days later. The new leaf he had turned over months ago regarding his work ethics and the use of modern age tools of the trade had wilted and browned around the edges. Leonard was lucky to check his computer twice a week lately. He was preoccupied with planning his departure, with a notepad, pencil, and long to-do list that grew longer by the day. There were moments Leonard thought it might be easier just to hide behind the 2 piles that had formed on his desk. The captain had gone back to giving the good cases to the younger detectives and giving him the ones no one else wanted, since he had already made it clear, and it was common knowledge, he was leaving as soon as he could get his affairs in order anyways. Chapter 26. The slamming of the front door did not stir Madison as she slept soundly, longer than she had intended. The second louder slam caused her to begin to swirl and shift underneath the warm, comfortable, and safe down comforter. In a short time, Madison had become attached to her room at Lynn's place. The only thing she could not leave without, however, was the comforter. She hoped Lynn would sell it to her when she was ready to move on. Sleep had become something Madison had to take when she could get it. Each day/night that passed, it was becoming increasingly difficult to settle in. She teetered between guilt, shame, and fear when trying to determine the cause of her sleep apnea. She could hear the answering of the door, the mumbling from the front, just at the foot of the steps, and finally the light steps of her sister coming to get her. When her sister stuck her head through the crack in the door, the expression on her face did not bring any relief. It was a look like their mother would give when the pair would try and sneak in after curfew years earlier, a combination of disappointment, bewilderment, and just too tired to do anything about it. "There are 2 men from the precinct here to see you, Madison." She paused as if to think of what to say next. "They didn't want to come back later," she stated, as if she had tried to deflect their interruption. Madison forced him to smile. "Tell them I'll be down as soon as I get dressed, please." Without making a move to slip out from under the warm covers until her sister was headed back down the stairs, she sat stiff as a board. Snippets of thoughts swimming past her in schools like the fish she had seen on the Discovery Channels heading upstream to spawn. Were the bears waiting downstairs? With oversized Georgetown sweatshirt and baggy flannel pants, Madison headed down the gray carpeted steps to meet her guests. Once on the steps, without an opportunity to turn back around, she realized she hadn't even looked in the mirror to survey her appearance. She could only imagine what she'd look like to the detectives. If nothing else, she was sure to have the crazy hair thing going on. Probably one side's frizzy, sticking straight out, and the other stuck flat to her head like a board. It was her normal morning do. Both men played their parts well. Neither showed any sign of life as she strolled down the stairs. There was no way to read what they were doing standing in the small foyer. Madison recognized the taller of the two as one she had interviewed with after the disappearance of Ryan. She remembered he had been compassionate enough in the light of what she had gone through. Now she could only hope for the same. "Hi, it's good to see you again." She smiled and extended her right hand. It had not been intentional, but had she just flirted with him? Either way, her hand was taken, softly, and let go. "We're sorry to bother you, but we wanted to speak to you before we had to leave town for the day." The taller man, she believed his name was Kevin or Kyle, spoke softly, as if he was afraid he would wake someone in the next room. "Miss Carver, we need to know if your husband has tried to contact you since his disappearance." The shorter, heavier man wanted to make his presence felt. "We've run out of leads. He hasn't used his debit or his credit cards. His picture's been plastered everywhere, and no one's seen him. No cell phone." Clearing his throat for effect. "It's like he just vanished while you were in the hospital." Madison waited to see if they were through, her heart settling back into its normal rhythm. They were here to discuss Ryan, not the serial murders. Now, clearing her throat to create her own effect, Madison spoke. "Ryan, my husband, has not tried to see or talk to me since he beat me up and tossed me down the stairs of our home." Without effort, she began to sob. "It's like he just walked away, not knowing if I lived or died." The crying was not fake. It was the real thing. The two, now uncomfortable detectives, standing before her, could not have known she was not crying about the circumstances they were there to discuss. She wasn't sure why she was crying to such a degree. It worked nonetheless. Men, all men, hated to be in a room with a sobbing woman, especially in the tiny space the three had been sharing. They could not have exited any quicker if the room had been on fire. Taking the steps 2 at a time, back up to her room, Madison felt better about the blubbering session. It cleansed her somehow. Now a nice long shower, a good breakfast, a look through today's papers classifieds, and then off to do the grocery shopping she had promised to do. She was going to make it a good day. Chapter 27. As the plane touched down, Shawn could feel himself relax ever so slightly. Still, he knew his safety would not be complete until the plane was stopped. Shawn was on his way to where his mind had already been for several days. A small town with too many crimes taking place all of a sudden. Had the devil and his legions moved in, or was something else going on in this otherwise quiet community? When Kenny had responded, The day after Shawn's original email with a very non-interested reply, Shawn was a little put off. But when Leonard finally emailed the day after that with a very generic one-liner about the weather, the family, and his impending retirement, well, Shawn was beside himself. Hadn't he proven himself during the child predator case? Hadn't he not sent the email looking for some kind of constructive feedback? Jill had made the mistake of asking him what was bothering him 2 days later. Unfortunately for her, he was in a spilling mood and he let it all come out. His insecurities about his promotion, the way he felt underutilized in the big picture of the FBI, and how he felt let down by his friends, whom he doubted even read everything he had forwarded. He took it all off his shoulders and firmly planted it on his wife's, who in turn asked him only one simple question. Don't you have a plain and expense account at your disposal to follow hunches just like this one? And that had been that. No more complaining, no more feeling sorry for himself, and no more waiting for someone to approve or tell him he was on to something. Nope. Shawn was following his God-given intuition to the farm country of Middle America. 2 murders, a disappearance, and talk of a serial killer just was not an everyday occurrence, not even in some of the larger cities, let alone one with a population of just around 15,000 people. And if there was going to be a third murder, it would happen soon, he felt. Jill had given her blessing, almost pushed him out the door to come and check things out for himself. It had all been simple, really. There was a secretary that booked the plane, hotel, and rental car. She had even emailed him all the important information, including when the pilot would meet him back at the airport 3 days later. Simple. Madison smiled as she headed towards the market. Her life had become something right out of the movies. She was a murderer, a cold-blooded murderer. What was the name of that movie? Natural Born Killers. If those around her only knew. Madison did not want this to be what she was. She had goals now, dreams that never had a chance as long as Ryan was around. The women had freed her from that life. All she was doing was returning the favor. True, they were committing hideous crimes, but had they not endured crime equal or worse over the years? Who had been there to help them? It was society that brought the desperate women to this place. It was not their fault, was it? Guilt would rise within her often, forcing it back with the horrific stories her friends had told, along with those she worked most of the time. Shortly into all of this, she had determined 2 things. She would not let the other women down, and she would not second guess their purpose. Guilt came from her upbringing, the faith she had in God, and her value system, so the second guessing would probably continue, so Madison focused on the first promise, not to let her friends down. Her upbringing had been good overall. Madison had had a normal childhood without incident. Now, the way her parents had raised her pushed its way through sometimes. She worried about letting them down. She did not want them to blame themselves or the lack of support that she had as an adult. They had done a good job raising her when she was younger. Faith in God had once been a very important part of her life. It was a part that most think would be stronger during her life with Ryan. The opposite had been true, however. Madison had blamed God for her situation and for her parents' response to her circumstances. It was odd, but now she found herself thinking more about the Bible, the stories she had heard, and some of the folks that had left an impression on her at their family churches when she was younger. The feeling she had when she was at church was a feeling she wanted back. Only one problem, she reminded herself now. She was committing one of the 10 Commandments, one she never thought she would have to worry about. Her value system had never come into question as a child, or even as a young woman. Madison had always been the responsible one, the dependable one, and the one with a level head on her shoulders. Madison would have to work hard to stay on top of her emotions. She knew it would get harder before it was over. It helped for her to think about when this whole thing would be over in a few more weeks. Maybe they could go off somewhere on a well-deserved vacation. Maybe she'd meet somebody special. Maybe go back to school and get her associate's degree in accounting. Maybe have another chance at the American dream. From her right, crossing her windshield, a plane passed. Madison turned to watch it descend towards Gordon's Field. The locals were not prepared to call it an airport, and most thought the name fit. Until 20 years prior, it had been a field, a massive field that supported cattle, horses, and provided the local markets with corn and beans. Now it was a helicopter pad, two long straight runways, several small metal buildings, and a small building with an antenna that seemed to raise to the stars at the far corner of the property. 2 dozen or so watercrafts that had been stored there for the winter also were spread across the field. Madison always wanted to fly. She liked the idea of taking off somewhere cold and landing somewhere tropical within hours. Hopes and dreams, we all need them, she thought. Chapter 28. Sandy could not have had a better day at work. Her supervisor was out of town for the day. Her co-worker was having family problems and had stayed on the phone all day, and Sandy had the rest of the office to herself. She tuned in her favorite radio station, ordered in what she wanted for lunch, and worked at her own pace with limited interruptions. It had been a good day. Now on her ride home, she wondered how the evening would be. Was she really on her way home to be greeted by the monster she had once called her husband for the last time? Could she stand by while Madison shot him in cold blood and then lie to the police? Others had done it. She was at least as strong as Tammy, wasn't she? As her Toyota Corolla rambled along, she wondered how they would be caught. They would be caught, wouldn't they? Didn't everyone get caught eventually? For Sandy, it was simple. She just wanted some quality time in her life without Fred. It would be 1 week or 20 years. She just wanted to feel normal. Her parents and friends had adored him when they first met, when they first started dating. He had been a rock to her tumbleweed. Everyone thought he would have a calming effect on her wild and crazy 20-somethings, and he had. With his good job, stable life, goals for the future, and home of his own, he had been exactly what her parents had wanted for their baby. Pulling up the steep and twisted driveway to her home now, she thought about what had become of their perfect little world. In a word, alcohol. As the Celica struggled to find grip on the gravel beneath the tires, Sandy could remember the first time. It had been just shy of their first wedding anniversary, a Thursday night. She had been watching the last 15 minutes of her favorite reality show when his headlights illuminated the living room walls. Fred had been out with the boys after work. They had asked him several times previous, and he had always said no. They had found his one weakness, however. Fred loved the Star Wars series, and they had suggested going out to dinner, and then the premiere of the next episode in the George Lucas masterpiece. Sandy knew Fred had been drinking. Trying to be the perfect wife, she had made light of his condition, helping him take off his shoes, working their way to the sofa where he could stop spinning. In a way, she had been happy for him. He worked so hard and did so little for himself in those days. She was fully prepared to be his support throughout the night. It was after he had been docile on the couch for a short time when he broke into a rage. With sudden fury, he was up on his feet, screaming something about the other men's wives having good paying jobs, and one had a boat, and another had a two-door sports car. It was confusing. It was a rant about his coworkers and what they owned, and what he didn't have because she didn't make enough money. When she tried to reason with him, she tried to give him coffee, tried to calm him down. Fred did something that was more shocking than his outburst. Her husband grabbed the hot coffee, tossed it into the kitchen floor, and took a backhanded swing at his wife. Fred's eyes were wide, shirt drenched with sweat, and face distorted and flush. It was the longest 5 seconds in her life, as she watched in horror as the man she shared her bed, her love, and her life with, swung at her face, missing by only an inch or less. It had been the shortest night in her 30-plus years. Madison felt like she had just closed her eyes when she heard her sister's family begin to stir, ready to start their day. On any other morning, she would have just rode it out until they left the house and went back to sleep for a few hours. Today, that just wasn't possible. There was things to do. Unlike the others, Madison wanted to take care of things earlier in the evening rather than later at night. Madison could not blame her. Why wait? So she'd get her errands done, fix dinner for the family before she had to head out, and then make her way to the mall. Not really a mall like you'd find in larger communities. Their mall consisted of a Walmart, shoe shop, hunting and supply store, a pizza joint, and an all-you-can-eat Chinese place. A two-story, two-theater movie complex, and a Sears discount store. Everything a person could want, she thought. Madison did not dwell on what she was doing this evening. It was a foregone conclusion what would happen as far as she was concerned, so there was no reason to fret or worry about what ifs. Instead, she did an hour at the gym, hit the supermarket because she'd bought the wrong coffee, returned 2 pair of pants that looked better in the store mirrors than on her, and stopped by her attorney's office to see when she may be able to collect on Ryan's insurance policy. Then home for her pre-homicide ritual. As she added broccoli to the stir fry, Madison thought about getting caught and how she'd handle it. Her wish, she'd go out with dignity, expecting no one, other than those who had lived through a similar situation, to understand or sympathize. She and her co-conspirators would be made out to be devils. That she knew for sure. In reality, they were just an assortment of women who had made wrong choices or just got the short end of the good luck stick. Madison was not about to let her last few hours with Fred get to her. She had assumed he would be in a good mood. It was rare they had extra money to go to the mall with, let alone spend found money at the hunting and supply store. Sandy had purchased a $100 gift card from the store earlier in the week and told Fred she had won it through a drawing she had signed up for months ago. He had heard nothing past $100 and the hunting store. The money had come out of their small emergency fund. For Sandy, there was no bigger emergency than making this happen. For her, this day could not pass fast enough. With that, I believe we'll stop for today. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode, and as always, thank you for joining me. I hope you'll join me next week as we continue the journey. Thank you and have a great day.